And you mentioned also about the public space, the community engagement, the regarding water equity and water governance is complex. This makes public participation in decision making and governance difficult, along with obstacles like language barriers, hours of availability, knowledge barriers like lack of technical support and training. Meaningfully addressing water issues with an equity lens requires lifting community voices, participation, and leadership. From your experience, Gloria and Laurel, what are some best or promising practices and principles for advancing water equity in disenfranchised communities?
Well, I think to start out, just to uplift a lot of what you both have said, we need to look at multi-benefit approaches very intentionally as we go into to do our work. So we need to look at not only how are we building resiliency, are we doing it in a way that is structured to enable equity, to address areas that have been underserved, and to ensure that there's affordability for everyone, and structure pathways no matter where you live and the economic status that you have. We need to be looking at how we're building in, how we're truly listening to what communities are need and are leading with. And so, for example, in different water projects that I've heard, where community voices and leaders have been really active and at the table from beginning, we really see integration of these multi-benefits, everything from jobs, good paying jobs, and also multi-benefits like green space, making sure that as we're building infrastructure, we're looking at ways to build green infrastructure to create access and healthy places and public spaces for communities that live there. So I think one piece is that. The other, I think, is being, as at least as a government agency, being very ensuring information is transparent and accessible, and making sure that we're seeking out and collecting and making available information that's meaningful and foundational to allow us to create solutions that address community needs. So, for example, as an extreme example, when I first started about 15 years ago working with communities that didn't have safe drinking water, there was no list and ability to see which communities didn't have safe drinking water, what were the different contaminants that they were dealing with. And much of that information was in paper files and not accessible to the public in ways that were meaningful. And so what that meant was that communities were really isolated. Households weren't getting information effectively about what was going on. And that also really inhibits not, households' ability and community ability to see, oh, my neighbors are experiencing the same thing. This seems to be a pattern. Let's figure out how to address this collectively as a region. Similarly, we have very vulnerable households in areas, and especially now with the drought and with our efforts to try and get sustainable groundwater management in these really critically overdrafted areas, you have these vulnerable households that aren't even on centralized system, that are reliant on individual wells for each household. And so those are the first to go dry. We saw thousands go dry in the last drought. And once you lose water, you often never, the wells often never recover. And so we have people that are still on tanks from the last drought. And so I think one of the powerful and important things is making sure that there's, now we have maps of where are there households that are on these vulnerable systems, making sure that the water management agencies and the groundwater sustainability agencies are actually using those maps in their planning, actually examining, how are their management decisions impacting those households, those most vulnerable households. And that was just missing before. That information wasn't there in ways that were accessible and could be built into the decision making that needs to be there. So, data often sounds kind of wonky, but at the end of the day, we can't solve for things when we're going in blind and when we can't see those communities that need it most and our neighbors. So we need to be able to make sure that that is core to what we do every day is deliberately collect information and bring that into the work that not only we can do as agencies, but that communities have accessible to enable them to make choices, to organize, to do the kind of engagement that they need and want and should be able to do to drive solutions.
Gloria?
So I would say I love this question because this is our work, right? Like this is where Scope has almost 30 years of experience in terms of what does it mean to really engage community members. I would say I guess for me, it's the genuine community engagement, right? I think there's community engagement, and then there's community engagement. Many times there has been community engagement just to check off a box to say like we had a space or a forum or a meeting with some community members to get feedback. But I think it's kind of reimagining, defining what does it really mean to have genuine community engagement. um, I think when we're talking about engaging communities, and we're thinking of practices and principles that are effective, we need to continually ask ourselves at every step of the way, is this conversation inclusive? Is it inclusive of the folks that are most impacted by the conditions that are problematic? Um, and are we creating a space where it is easy for them to be engaged? Community engagement is not easy. There are many factors that provide challenges for folks to engage, whether it's they don't really have the time, if they're carrying 2, 3 jobs, if they have a lack of childcare, if they have a lack of transportation. I think right now in the time of COVID, if they have issues with uh, technical ability to be able to jump on a meeting like this and be able to participate virtually. Um, so there are many issues, and I think when we're talking about effective, real engagement, real inclusivity, is to to ask ourselves all of these hard questions about why people maybe have not participated. There's reasons. It's not that people don't care or don't want to be engaged, and I think for us to acknowledge that. I think when we have included community members in developing strategies and thinking about solutions, it's been successful. Good things have come out of it. It has been proven successful. One of the things that I want to elevate is that, um, for example, the CARES funding that LADWP used to provide a one-time stipend for ratepayers. Um, and so folks were really happy to hear that they can apply if they qualified, and be able to get a $500 check to be able to use it where most needed. These are the kind of solutions, these are the kind of programs that, one, I think create trust between the agencies and the ratepayers. but also that create some sort of support, some real support, so that folks could really address, right, the situation, the economic situation that they're facing, the debt situation that they're facing. So that's a great example. And again, these are things that happen because community advocates for these types of programs, because community members lift up their voices. Another program that I think is a great example is the Utility Pre-Craft Training Program, or known as UPCT. This program was launched in 2011, and it has been a partnership between IBEW Local 18 and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. This program was created with the support of community-based organizations like Scope, like Lane, like so many other organizations in Los Angeles that are engaging community members on the ground, and asking them to participate in the process of identifying solutions. And so I think, this program, this UPCT program, was really in response to the need for creating good jobs, particularly for areas in the city of LA where there's high unemployment rate. So we have the structures, we have the public sector spaces to be able to create some of these innovative solutions. Um, I think the other thing is Measure W, which passed at the county level. That was another perfect example of when community members advocate for innovative solutions that we can find, right, that we are moving in the right direction of addressing the way that we capture stormwater, for example, through Measure W. Um, and just to elevate, like Measure W, increase the parcel tax, and I think that creates a little bit of tension for community members, because they then their taxes will increase. But I think many times what we've seen from community members is that they're willing to pay a little bit more. They're willing to be able to provide the funding necessary to launch these programs. But what they do want to see is that they want to see clear benefits coming out of these programs, right? Thinking about the way we capture water in Los Angeles, and how that can create other benefits for community, like green spaces, the potential for new jobs in new sectors that really address water shortage, especially in a place like California, where we've been dealing with drought for many years. And so I would say that it's that type of engagement, it's that type of inclusivity um, produces some of the best outcomes, right? And that should be driving the best practices and the best principles, in including disenfranchised communities as part of this conversation.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Laurel. One takeaway that I have here is that we all move at the speed of trust, and that trust building in the community is essential. As Laurel mentioned, active listening, truly listening, being transparent, having the data, meaningful data that will allow our communities to make decisions and give us their input. So thank you for your insights, your candor. And before we go to the student Q&A, let me see if I can summarize this panel's discussion. These elements rise to the top for me. The human right to water is imperative to safe and affordable water services. That's number one. Number two, our communities have agency in water infrastructure policy making processes that shape their lives. That for me resonated so much. And that is one thing that we really need to be very mindful of if we need to have effective, meaningful programs for water. And then equitable, inclusive practices when we do the rate structure, when we think about debt relief and other financial assistance programs for those in need, with community-driven conversations are important. And also ensuring equitable and inclusive practices as well in the design, operations, maintenance, and management of water infrastructure. For me, those are the elements that rise to the top of my list. So thank you, Laurel and Gloria. This is a pleasure, an honor, and a lot of learning, continuous learning for me. And I hope it is also for the two of you. And before we go to the lightning rod question, I just want to phrase the question this way. So DWP is supporting a major citywide initiative to increase access to clean, healthy water, as well as decrease reliance on single-use plastic water bottles. In collaboration with WeTap, the multiple city departments and agency, DWP will install or refurbish like 200 drinking water fountains or hydration stations by 2022 at municipally owned buildings, parks, and other public places. And that's part of the goal of the mayor's Green New Deal. Stations have already been in place at rec and parks like Balboa Park, the LA City Hall East, and at LADWP's John Ferraro building. So all hydration stations will feature reusable water bottle filling stations, and some outdoor stations will include those spigots to fill water bowls for our pets. And it's also in anticipation of the 2028 Olympics in LA. So we'll be installing those hydration stations in strategic locations that are expected to draw large numbers of spectators and participants. So my question to you, think outside the box. In celebration of Tap Water Day, where would you have a water hydration station installed? Who wants to start first? I can start. I would like to see storefronts have a water hydration station so people will not buy plastic water bottle, right? And just use their refillable bottle whenever they're thirsty.
I'll just say, I'll say schools. You know, we've done a lot of funding programs for schools, but you know, every school should have access. You know, water filling station in cafeterias, in gyms where they're able to be outside in recess and play, and you know, able to bring into their classrooms. So I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
So thank you for that question, Anna. That's a great question. I had never really thought about that, but it's exciting to think about where we can make that addition to improve our community. It makes me think of like the two main places that I feel that our community members rely on. One is parks, as South LA is a heavily dense community, and there's a lack of space in the places where folks rely on parks very much. And so I would say parks. And then the other, I feel like the other space that our community members frequent and rely on is public transportation. We have a high transportation ridership in South Los Angeles, so it would be wonderful to have these drinking water sources in area actually wait for buses or wait for trains or for the metro.
Really good ideas. Wonderful. That's so exciting. So I know Evelyn will be happy for us giving her ideas where those water hydration stations will be. So we'll go to the student Q&A. We received several questions, and I'm gonna direct it to one or the other. So first question, how are these water systems regulated? And what happens if a water system is out of compliance? I think this is a Laurel question.
Yeah. Yes, this is a Laurel question. So the public water systems are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and our agency is a regulatory agency. We have offices all over the state that oversee and inspect drinking water systems. Each drinking water system has to do an annual report. They are doing often quarterly water sampling and reporting that data to us. And there's a complex array of regulations that they have to meet. We don't regulate systems that are under 15 connections or 15 households as a community water system. So there are different regulations, and in some cases, no regulations at all if you are, say, a single household with their own well. But for these publicly regulated water systems, our agency oversees that. Each of the individual agencies that are community water systems not only have to do monitoring and reporting, they have to share an annual consumer confidence report with their customers that explains what their water quality is and also if they have any violations. And then our agency will issue notices of violations if there are problems. In some cases, we have to require fines, and other times there's, a compliance period to make sure that the corrections are made. And these regulations are everything from water quality, water treatment, water operations, and maintenance requirements. Again, to noticing and that kind of customer communication requirements. So there's a whole host of regulatory requirements. One limitation that we do have is that on the water quality side, we really go contaminant by contaminant. So we have a huge list of contaminants, of potential contaminants that drinking water systems are monitoring for. If they are detecting it, they're treating it, or they're ensuring they're mixing it with other sources to make sure it's below legal limits. The number of chemicals that are needed to be tested for and are tested for on a regular basis and then reported on is high. There's new chemicals that continue to that we continue to sort of learn about and have to bring into our regulatory program, and that really is again on us to do that process of adopting new standards and reviewing the standards that we have.
Thank you. I agree with you because DWP has a lot of regulations and compliance and reports that we do to the state. Another question that came up is, whose responsibility is it to provide clean water to cities? Let's start with Gloria.
I would say that the question depends on who you ask, right? I think it's providing safe water, affordable water is a huge responsibility. As I had mentioned before, and I think as a leader of a social justice organization, I would say that it's the public's responsibility. It's us as a community. And so I feel like it lands in the hands of state and local agencies, public to respond to that responsibility, to be able to provide basic human right, the right to access to water. And I think that it is the responsibility of us as government to be able to service these constituencies through an equity lens, right? Looking at it through justice, to making sure that the affordability and the access is equitable across the board, regardless of where you live, regardless of your zip code. And so, feeling like that, those who have been most marginalized, those who have been bearing the brunt of the inequitable process of resource allocation should be the first ones in line. um, the public sector, the people, us, we should held responsible for providing clean, safe, and accessible water. I think that there's a moral obligation, as a moral standpoint. We should be investing in places where there's struggle around water accessibility. We should be investing in communities that have been historically left behind. um, we can see the difference in the use of water, right? It's palpable. We can see the difference between the water resources from one community to another, just within the city of LA. Different communities have different access, or can't afford different amounts of water. So we see that with communities, there's enough water to keep their lawn green and lush and beautiful. There's enough water to maintain their swimming pools. And then you go to a place like South LA, and you can vividly see that community members have to ration their water use for basic needs like bathing and cooking, not because it's not available when they turn on their tap, but because they're afraid of what it would cost them and their inability to pay and manage those bills. And so we know that water access is right now, and so it's really important for us to take on that responsibility to provide a space for folks to speak up, to think about solutions, to identify what are the conditions that is making it difficult for them to really be able to afford water. um, so again, I think it's a part of that responsibility is thinking about short-term and long-term programs that can help address what is the need at this given moment, and really thinking forward what might be some needs in the future, and thinking proactively of how do we respond to those.
Thank you. Laurel?
Well, I'll say that again, our water systems are so fragmented and built on this legacy of historic disinvestment and inequality and racially restrictive land ownership. So there are cities that I know well where even within city limits, there's pockets that are not served by the city larger water system, or there's smaller systems or a mobile home park that is its own water system and not part of the larger city system. And so unfortunately, it's a really complex question in practice, right? If you are an individual trying to figure out who provides you water, and are those the same people that provide it to your neighbor? That's not always a straightforward answer, and it goes to looking at who you're paying your water bill to. I think that's that's ultimately the entity that's responsible for providing you safe water. But who that is really differs even within a city. And so usually you have one provider within a city that's providing water to the whole city. But that's not always true. And I think as we look at addressing equity and this question, we need to be looking beyond our current jurisdictional boundaries and looking and thinking of this as collectively with our neighbors. If you've got a neighborhood just on the other side of a border that doesn't have safe water, but everyone on your side of the border does, really we're all collectively a community. We're all collectively part of the same state and the same area, sometimes the same city. And, this is something where we're all going to be stronger together. We all believe, and I think all expect and affirm that everyone deserves access to safe and affordable water, that is a basic human right, and that we all need to be part of ensuring everyone can have that.
Thank you. The third question I have is actually for all three of us. How do I know if my water is safe to drink? Let's start with Gloria again, and then Laurel, and then I'll add perspective from LADWP.
So what we tell our community members is that there are ways to make sure that there's nothing wrong with your water. Basic things that we can do, like making sure that it smells the right way, that it tastes right, and that it looks appropriate to drink. There's just some basic things, right? In the case of South Los Angeles, there have been incidents or cases that the water smell is questionable, or that the taste is doesn't feel right, or that it looks strange. In particular, there have been detections, for example, of lead in the water in public school spaces, or that in South LA, the water from the faucet comes out brown. But I think that one thing that we have learned is that the answer to that is very complex, right? It's not just that the water coming straight from the utility, that there's a problem with it. It's a very complex system, and so that we need to be looking at various things, right? We need to consider that it might be old city infrastructure. It might be also that the pipes on private property or school property are not updated, and they're old. And so it's not an easy answer. I think there's some basic things that we can do to make sure that it smells, it tastes, and it looks right. And if it doesn't, and it's questionable, then we need to, make sure that we can find answers. The other thing that I would just say is that we need to continually be informed, and research at a community level. If we feel that it's not safe, we need to investigate. I would say, like, for example, DWP. I know that I know this is information is available for ratepayers on their way, and so that's one of the things that we do. Community members, um, we help build their capacity to do community-based research, to investigate on their own, to be curious, and to find solutions. And so it might be as easy as calling DWP if there's some sort of questionable taste or smell to the water, or look up on the website and see what the reports are telling us, in terms of water testing that has been conducted by the agency itself. Um, the other thing is that as a community group, Scope has invited experts, water experts, and also LADWP representatives to come to our office, and they have gladly come, and have been able to engage with community members in forum spaces or educational spaces to be able to answer questions that folks might have about the state of their water. I would say that all of this that I just mentioned is just being proactive, taking a proactive role in understanding the quality of our own water, as I would say it applies for everything else in our community, right? Understanding the quality of our air. And so I would say being community based investigators is.
Laura?
So, this is a really hard question. And I think, each person is different. And so, these are somewhat personal decisions that people make. I will say knowledge is power, right? At the end of the day, the only way that you can make your own personal decisions is if you have good information. And I think a lot of times there's distrust of what's in your water, because it's hard to know. Most contaminants have no taste and smell, and so unless it's coming out brown or smelling bad, you don't know what's in there unless you start to get good information. And I think that's where going to your water provider and ensuring that they're able to give you that information. They're doing, like I said, a huge amount of testing on a very frequent basis on so many contaminants. And they put that information out at least on an annual basis. Some do it more, to their customers so that you can see what's in your water, as tested through certified labs and how that compares to the level that we require through regulation, as well as what we call the public health goal, which is, a level purely based on what's the most health protective. And so you can see those compared to each other. If you have concerns about your water, I would strongly encourage you to go to your water, or to contact your water provider if you're seeing, both to ask questions, but also if you are experiencing problems, like if there's discolored water or smells, you should be logging those complaints with your provider, because that's something that we as regulators look at and can ensure that we're helping to ensure those are investigated. And I know water providers take seriously. Lastly, I would say, and this goes to what Gloria was talking about, there are limits to our regulatory program. And what we really regulate is this public water provider system. But once that water goes into a home or building outside of that public distribution system, there are contaminants within plumbing fixtures, for example, lead, or parts within the distribution system that have manganese or these other contaminants that are of concern. And, unless you are testing at every single tap, you can't say for certain whether, for example, you have lead from those particular fixtures. So at some level, for certain contaminants like lead, there are risks if you have certain old pipes with lead fixtures in your home or your building. That said, water systems are required to both be testing a representative sample of taps to make sure that they're not detecting that as a problem on any kind of more systemic basis. That's not going to be at every single tap, but that is a good indicator generally of whether this is a problem in your area. And if they are finding that, they are certainly notifying the folks that have those connections, but also ensuring that the water that they're providing isn't going to exacerbate that problem, isn't going to help move lead, for example, out. And then finally, there's a lot that systems are doing and do every day around just operating water systems in ways that continue to flush and not allow contaminants contaminants to accumulate within a distribution system. I guess bottom line is there is an incredible amount of investment and expertise, money, and really hardworking people that go into ensuring that you have safe tap water every day. It's often unseen. And it's something that I think we often don't value enough, but is something that we need to ensure that consumers are able to have the information they need to have that trust, to be able to make their own decisions, and ultimately to have the information they need to feel like they can make the decision that's best for them.
Thank you. So as for the LA Department of Water and Power, We are committed to provide our customers and the communities we serve with clean, safe, and cost-effective drinking water that meets federal and state standards, and there's a lot of them. The water that comes out of the customer's taps has been through rigorous treatment, testing, and monitoring. In 2019 alone, we collected over 30,000 water samples and conducted more than 124,000 water quality tests throughout the drinking water system for compliance with safe drinking water standards. DWP has also invested more than $1.3 billion in 26 major infrastructure projects to safeguard the city's drinking water and meet strict regulations. And these regulations include long-term enhanced surface water treatment rule, or they call it LT2, which provides drinking water in reservoirs from microbiological contamination. Laurel mentioned the different contaminants that we could have, and the stage 2 disinfectants, right, or disinfection by the products ruled, or the DP2, we call it on a technical term. We also issue our water quality report annually, and we invest a lot with our equity metrics to make sure that we are made accountable for the water quality that we deliver. There is, of course, a strategic plan, a plan in place as to the replacement of those pipes, the aging infrastructure pipes, and that's where we have invested billions of dollars. So I just want to assure Angelinos that LADWP is invested in the health and safety of our customers and is committed to providing that clean, safe, and cost-effective drinking water. In fact, I'm drinking one right now from the tap. So thank you to all the students for your questions. Those are all inspiring questions for the three of us to respond to. And I would like to personally thank my cohorts here, Laurel and Gloria, for joining me in this very exciting and thought-provoking question about equity and water.